The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Season 1, Episode 2, Ted and Mary. My thoughts right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So grateful to have you. I'm Yoel, and in today's video, I'm going to continue discussing my insights on the insights of Jeff Garlin and Susie Essman in their fantastic new series, The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And today's video is on the second episode of season 1 called Ted and Mary, of course, referring to Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen, who are a real life couple, and we're introduced to them for the first time in this episode. So let's jump right into thoughts that I had on Jeff and as Susie's thoughts. Now, they started to, it's interesting, they started discussing the idea of bowling, okay, because that's where the episode takes place. In the beginning of the episode, they're bowling together as couples, Larry and Cheryl and Ted and Mary. And Susie is saying, you know, she wonders if Larry actually ever bowled in real life, so to speak. And Jeff is kind of doubting it, and they're talking about bowling. You know, is it enjoyable? And Jeff says he doesn't like it, although he ends up saying it's because he was called Gutterball Joe or whatever his nickname was. Although nobody really goes and cares about how good somebody is in bowling. I mean, it does get competitive sometimes, but for the most part, you're going just to have a good time. And I just wanted to bring out that I actually think that bowling is a pretty underrated activity, both for couples, because I don't remember doing it very much with my wife of yore, you know, when I was married. Every once in a while, but not that often. More often than not, we would either go to a movie or go to a restaurant, go to a bar, have some drinks or something like that. But bowling is actually a pretty underrated activity. Yes, it could be nerdy in a certain sense, but think of the Big Lebowski. Think of all the laughs that could really come out as a result of you know, a good night of bowling. And then, in fact, the whole episode of Curb was based around it. So I think I just wanted to bring out that I think bowling's an excellent activity. I happen to think it's a great dating activity as well, especially for like a second or third date. And yeah, you know, the fact that they're kind of wondering if Larry ever went bowling, that is interesting. I wouldn't surprise me if Larry did bowl. Wouldn't surprise me if, like they were saying, maybe he had his own bowling shoes. I mean, back then he didn't really have the money to afford maybe his own bowling shoes, but these days he could definitely bring his own bowling shoes. I don't know how much time he would have for bowling. I think he's more of a golfer. But that being said, regardless, I just wanted to bring out that I think bowling itself happens to be a great activity, pretty underrated. Let's bring bowling back, all right? All you guys watching out there, let's bring bowling back. I think it's a great activity. Anyway, moving right along, I think it's interesting that as Jeff starts to talk about Ted Danson, he remarks about how starstruck he is to this day. Like he loves Ted Danson. He used to watch Ted Danson as he was pulling out of the parking lot of the studio, and he's in his fancy car, and he'd be envious of him, and he never thought one day he'd be working with him. It's Ted Danson. I always find it interesting to see celebrities themselves being starstruck by other celebrities. Now, something that was a real revelation to me, and this is one of the many reasons I'm enjoying Susie and Jeff's show, is that I was surprised to hear that Larry doesn't use a lot of foul language in his everyday life, because in the show, they kind of glossed over this. I think Larry swears and curses quite a bit.
Are you fucking crazy? Huh? Tickling my anus?
She's just
Where do you come from? Why'd you say that? I don't have a tickle. Who said that?
Look, I gotta go.
Look, I think I've given you the wrong impression. Larry's anus is fine.
Shut the fuck up, okay? Shut the fuck up!
I wouldn't say he's got the potty mouth that Susie has on the show, but Larry really swears quite a bit. And he also really makes usage of curse words to emphasize humor. There's a lot of like fuck yous or go fuck yourself or shut the fuck up and things of that nature. And so it was kind of surprising to me that in his everyday life, Larry isn't really like that. Also, because I'm pretty sure I've heard Larry say in interviews that he finds it like hilariously amusing when people curse him out. So for them to say that Larry doesn't actually like or enjoy using profanity in his everyday conversation, that was a real revelation to me that I thought I would point out. And yeah, so this is interesting as well. Susie's talking about the idea of like, we're not dead. When somebody's in a relationship or married, and, you know, it's not like all of a sudden you can't flirt anymore. You know, we're human beings. I just wanted to bring out, I think the idea of whether or not, you know, your significant other is okay with you flirting has a lot to do with trust. Okay. So if you're in a good, positive, healthy relationship, then a little bit of flirting that's harmless is not something that any partner, I think, generally cares about. But when there's kind of a little bit of a breakdown of trust, or if somebody's a bit possessive or clingy, that's when it can really get, it can really be problematic. That's not to say I'm encouraging people to go flirting or anything like that, but I'm just saying I'm kind of underscoring Susie's point that it's not the end of the world for, somebody who's in a relationship to be somewhat flirty, as long as it's kind of in context and there's that kind of understanding and healthy relationship between the person who's doing the flirting with his or her own partner. Okay, again, flirting could definitely lead to other things. I'm not suggesting that it's always harmless. A lot of times, unfortunately, affairs have started with what people thought were harmless flirts. So I can certainly understand the concern what one may have. But I do think if that trust factor is there between a couple and they're able to trust one another and know it's going to be nothing more than that, then I can see what Susie's saying. But it definitely can be a slippery slope. So the whole idea of flirting within the context of a monogamous relationship is an interesting one that I thought I would bring out. Not to make this overly serious when we're talking about Curb, but it was kind of an interesting point that Susie was talking about with Jeff. Now, and that kind of, by the way, I noted down here, that kind of ties back to what I talked about in the previous episode, where Cheryl tells Larry to go with her friend. And they were talking, Jeff and Susie were discussing in the previous episode how, would a wife actually do that? And I said, well, the reason why Cheryl was willing to do that is because she doesn't view Larry David as a threat. And in this instance as well, flirting, if you don't view your husband as a threat, it could be okay. But if you do view your husband as a threat, or you're of that kind of possessory or jealous type, that's when it could be a situation. And or also in this case, what ends up happening on the episode is that Larry is kind of effusive, as Susie puts it, in his in his complimenting of Mary Steenburgen, and that's precisely because he does have a crush on her, and that was his mistake, so to speak, of just overly complimenting her and talking about her nonstop. Like, I really like Mary. She's great, isn't she? And you see the camera like zoom in on Larry's face, like, she's great, right? Mary, she's great. And you see him kind of repeating it to himself. They didn't show it on the video series of Jeff and Susie, but I remember that from watching the episode. And I remember thinking like, wow, he's really laying it on thick here. He better watch out. And sure enough, that's what ends up happening as Larry spends time with Mary shopping. And it becomes very clear to Cheryl that this is getting a little creepy. It's getting a little too close for comfort. And that's when the slippery slope happens. So it kind of underscores what I was talking about before, that, flirting in its place could be okay in the context of a trusting relationship, but it can be a slippery slope as well as what ends up happening here. Even though, again, in all likelihood, I don't think Larry David would have actually ever acted on anything. He was probably just living out a kind of a fantasy by going shopping, but that's kind of where it probably would have ended. But that's neither here nor there, because we see, what ends up ensuing as a result of his little outing with Mary and her mother. And something else that's, that I wanted to point out is, again, I've talked about this when, in the last episode, when they're at the restaurant and they're ordering from the menu. And what's the funniest about the scene is what's not said. So here as well, it's kind of like their faces that they're making when the camera's zooming in on them. When Cheryl finds out that he buys the same jacket or sweater that Mary has, and then Ted Danson finds out and he gives that sort of scowl, that understated way in which the humor is happening. It's not even what's written on the page, because so little is written on the page. It's all an outline. It's not an actual script, but it's really the in-between things. It's the subtleties that makes Curb Your Enthusiasm great. And I also enjoyed hearing Jeff and Susie say how much they like the simplicity. The episodes earlier on were a lot more simplistic than they are now. And I tend to agree with them. I really enjoy the simplicity. And I've talked about the idea of simplicity a lot, not just in the context of popular culture, but also in the idea of consciousness and personal development. Overall, I don't want to generalize too much, but overall, when you keep things simple, you tend to be doing a better job of what you're trying to accomplish. When you try and overdo things, that's when things could kind of get, I don't want to say out of control, but maybe much more harder to manage. If you're trying to do too much, or you're trying to overthink things, whatever the case may be, simplicity is always a great idea. It's really the purest form of sophistication. And we know that Steve Jobs used to talk about the idea of simplicity as well with Apple, and we know what he did with that company. So I like the fact that Susie and Jeff were talking about their affinity for simplicity. I agree. And I try and do that with this channel as well. I keep doing my own shameless plugs. And I talked about in the previous video how I just focus on doing what I enjoy. I also try and keep it simple. I'm not, you know, I've talked about my video editing or lack thereof, and also of, you know, the fact that I'm not a big social media guru. I definitely, there's nothing wrong. In fact, it is commendable. And I do encourage taking action to work on growing one's channel. If you're a YouTube, you know, if you're a YouTube person out there that's watching this, or whatever the case may be, nobody's saying that you should just rest on your laurels and not always try and improve and do well. But I also think that starting out, if you try and do too much, you end up not accomplishing what you can if you try and keep things simple. There's a, you know, I talk about the Talmud a lot in this video, you know, relatively a lot. And there's a Talmudic expression that says that if you try and grab too much, you end up grabbing nothing. Everything kind of slips out of your hand. Whereas go for a little bit and keep building off of that. So simplicity is really an idea that I really relate to. And also more specifically on the episode, so we know that Larry has his shoes taken from the bowling alley. He subsequently goes when he's shopping with Mary and he orders another pair of shoes. And you see he's kind of hesitant. He doesn't really want to, but he ends up doing it. And then that ends up becoming a big problem because he finds his other shoes get recovered from the bowling alley. So he doesn't need the shoes that he ordered. And it's so typical. And I've had that fear, by the way. I remember when I've had to pre-order things, and either they want you to pay for it, and it's like, well, how do I know I'm going to need these? I don't know if I really want them. It's one thing when you buy something and you actually walk out of the store with them, although nowadays with Amazon, people are pre-ordering things all the time. But Amazon has such good customer service that people aren't as concerned. But going into a store and pre-ordering, it's not a comfortable feeling. And Larry plays that out. All of those kind of inside fears that we have, he plays that out. Or alternatively, even if you don't have to pay for it, there's that idea of like, okay, you know, well, I may not buy it. I remember that I've given that disclaimer in the past where like, okay, as long as you know that if you order it, you're going to get it and you're going to keep it in stock. Don't rely on me. You know, even though it could be a huge department store or whatever the case may be, I still don't want anybody ordering things for me, which I know I may not buy. And that's what ends up happening here in this episode. So it's just so funny to see these kind of neuroses, you know, the neurotic side of a lot of us out there. Larry plays it out for us on the screen. And something that struck me is towards the end of the episode, Jeff is laughing so much about the episode that he can't even get the words out. And I have that too. Like when I recount something funny that happened from a certain episode, I'll be laughing as I talk about it. And it's just funny to see Jeff, who's an actual actor. And as he says in this video, he was there when it was edited. He was part of the production. He was involved in every part of the process almost. And there he is laughing, even as he recounts the hilarity of the scene. So it's very funny and fresh to watch an actual actor laughing like a giddy fan, just in the same way as a fan like me would. And finally, also, as Jeff and Susie, they talked about the idea of Larry David, how his mind works, where they're sitting at home waiting to hear from Ted and Mary about the Paul Simon concert, and Larry's bemoaning the fact that they haven't even called and lied. You know, at least lie. It's just so funny. It's true. Like Susie's saying, like the way Larry David thinks. And a lot of us think that way, but nobody would express it. Nobody would think to express it that way. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. I mean, there have been times where I'll express something in a certain way and people will laugh. I've been called Larry David sometimes in the past. You know, it's not so flattering in this context. Thankfully, I haven't been called that in a very long time, but I would kind of express things that way. And to watch Larry David expressing it as well, like at least lie, like he's not even saying, at least they should call, have the decency to call. He's not even saying that. He's like, have the decency to call and lie. And who would say that, but really Larry David, or those people that kind of are as neurotic or think like him. So I have been known to say some things that Larry David may have said, not to put myself in the same category, but for the average person, it's not the kind of spoken thing that somebody would say or the way that somebody would think. People don't think they'd prefer for somebody to lie to them. They prefer that somebody would call them, but to lie to them, it's funny to watch Larry David saying, I'd prefer that they'd call and lie to me, which just adds another layer to the humor. And I'm glad that Jeff and Susie reminded me of that line of the episode. It's just such gold, comedy gold. Anyway, those are my thoughts and insights on this season 2, episode 2, History of Curb Your Enthusiasm series. And I'm curious to know, as always, what your thoughts are. What do you think I missed? Do you agree with what I had to say? Do you have anything to add? Love to get your feedback. I'm asking you to please remember to like the video and to subscribe, which will not only help me, but you'll also not miss another video. If you're enjoying this series, you'll make sure not to miss that next video. And I talk about all sorts of different popular culture topics, also consciousness. It's a real mix of different subjects. So hit that subscribe button, as they say, and you'll be doing each of us a favor. and keep coming back. I am always grateful for you for joining, grateful for your comments and your feedback. And until next time, looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. You'd not only be helping me, you'd also be helping yourself to not miss a future video. Your comments and feedback are always welcome. And don't forget to hit the actual like button on the video as well. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one.